Hello, hello. Yeah. Okay. Good morning, students. And today we will be discussing about the agrarian rural structure. That what constitute agrarian rural structures, and we will also discuss about the peasants, and we will try to understand. In the last class, basically we understood uh, the meaning and significance of rural sociology as well as urban sociology. And we also touched upon the aspects of the nature of rural sociology and nature of urban sociology as well, right? In this class, and we will be trying to understand, right, uh, uh, the peasant studies and basically uh, rural sociology and the rural society, peasants play a huge role in determining the agrarian structure of Indian society, right? So let us discuss, try to discuss about peasants, right? So and who are peasants, and basically you may get that doubt that who are peasants, and it's very familiar term, right? So, peasants are nothing but people who depend on agriculture, are differentiated in terms of their relation with the land, such as owners of the land, absentee landlords, and supervisory agriculturalists, and owner cultivators. And we have share croppers, tenants, and landless laborers. So, in a way that in general and in local language, they are known as kisans, So, in India, the famous terminology and what the basic makers of India, the makers of India, one can say it is the Jawan, and on the one hand, it is the Kisan on the other hand, right? So, and Jawan indicates that soldiers of this country and who protect our land from all sort of enemy threats, right? So, whereas when it comes to the Kisans are nothing but farmers of this country, and who play a crucial role in giving us 3-day meal to the billions of people in India, right? So they are the real makers of India. On one hand, you have Jawans, and other hand, you have Kisans in popular terminology. So Kisans are peasants. Kisans are farmers, right? Because they farm the land, and and they produce food, crops, and for our for staple food, on a daily basis, right? So the word Kisan is often translated as peasant in the academic literature that is published in English, right? So, according to Goff, and there are various scholars and who attempted to define the terminology of peasants. So, for instance, and we have scholars like Goff, and who says that, and peasants are people and who engage in agriculture or related production with primitive means, and who surrender part of their produce to landlords or to agents of state, right? So, in other words, they are the people who engage in agriculture or related production with primitive means, and who surrender part of their produce to landlords or to agents of state. So what does it mean here, right? And they surrender their agricultural produce to landlords, and till recently, in fact, there are still many farmers, and who engage themselves as tenants, agricultural tenants, and who work on the lands of landlords as part of the lease agreement, and they engage in agricultural activity. They invest a lot of their energy in terms of money, and also the time. They indulge in agricultural production, and once they take that agricultural output, and they surrender part of their agricultural produce to you know to landlords. That one thing is that landlords, and another thing is that even they also sell their agricultural produce to the agents of state. So what does it mean? It means that, and now this Indian state now is coming forward to buy that agricultural produce, right? The government, as you all know that in most parts of the rural country of India, that you find that a lot of agricultural sheds and agricultural markets are there, where the farmers, they come with their agricultural produce to marketize their products in those agricultural cooperative societies, right? So they come and they sell their produce, and who buys this? Either those agricultural produce is bought by the state, or it is bought by another business, the middleman, right? So it means that the agricultural produce is surrender, and we are using the word, when it comes to the landlords, we are using the word surrender, and we are not using the word market. So because once it is the landlord, always he not he doesn't buy those agricultural produce. Rather, it is the farmer and who surrenders their agricultural produce to the landlords. So it means that there are a lot of relations are there, and will be trying to understand and address those issues in this present class, right? So from the mid 1980s, a few scholars have started farmer instead of peasant. And according to John Bremen, a peasant is the one who tills the land. So it's a basic understanding of farmer. So who is a farmer? So farmer is the one who tills the land, right? So what are the types of peasants we have in the sociology discourse? And according to Doshi and Jain, this is another scholars, and who attempted to understand the type of peasants that are present in the society. So according to them, the sociologists have given different classification of peasants. The classification varies from situation to situation. As it is true that Indian, when we take the example of India as a society, the agricultural society, so we can't find the same homogeneous, the characteristics of whole India. And suppose if you go to Punjab and you find a different agrarian setup, if you go to Andhra Pradesh, you have a different agrarian setup, and if you go to Telangana and the rural setup, you find a different agrarian setup. If you go to Karnataka and parts of Kerala, you find a different. If you go to northeast part, for instance, you find a different agrarian setup. So it means that the classification of these types of peasants, it varies from the situation to situation and the place to place in India, right? So it should be clear that the type of classical classification, it varies from situation to situation, from one part of the local entity to another part of the local entity and context, right? So what is the first type of peasants now we'll be discussing, right? On the basis of land ownership, for instance, Daniel Turner, and is one of the very famous sociologists, and he gave a lot of explanation regarding the rural sociology and the type of ownership that exists in Indian society. So he gave a beautiful description of Indian society and how the rural sociology works in Indian society. So he gave a lot of description, and with a wide variety of examples in Indian context. So according to Daniel Turner, so he has taken a land ownership as a basis for classifying the peasants, right? So the peasants who have the documents, who have the document of land of ownership in their name as the Maliks, and those who do not own the land ownership document, that is called Patta, right? But cultivate the land, are the Kisans and the tillers of the land. So that is the agricultural laborers and are known as the Mazdoor. So we have a famous terminology, Mazdoor. Mazdoor means the agricultural laborers, right? So if you take the example that on the basis of the ownership land, and those who own the land, those who own the land, they are called maliks, or they are the land owners, and those who do not own the land, but they are the laborers or tenants of that land. And yeah, but still they take the lease agreement with the landowners, and who take active part in the cultivation of the agricultural produce in the ownership of the landlords, in the ownership of, since they don't own the land, and they're called as tenants, they're called as the agricultural laborers, they're called as the petty marginalized agricultural farmers, right? So uh, uh, so on the basis of land ownership, so we can say that, so there are two kinds of the classes: those who own the land and those who do not own the land. And those who do not own the land, they work on the lands of the ownership in the name of land seizing, or the land lease, right? So the lease, that comes into force as part of the agreement. And once the tiller of the land, the farmer, and who produces the agricultural produce, and he surrenders as he's part of the agricultural produces to the landowner as part of this lease agreement, as part of the lease agreement on the land, on the agricultural land. Isn't it? Is it clear? So on the and the another characteristics is that on the basis of the size of the land holdings. So once the one type of peasant we can find is the land ownership of the land, and the second characteristics could be on the size of the on the basis of the size of the land holdings. So we'll see, we'll try to understand this aspect. So some state governments have classified the types of peasants on the basis of the size of their land holdings. Accordingly, the classification is as follows, right? So, for example, and the rich peasants, and who are the rich peasants, and those who own 15 acres and 20 acres and more, hundreds of acres, they are the rich peasants, and those who own that type of land. And we have a small peasants also, those who possess the land between 2.5 to 5 acres. Those are the small peasants. And we have a marginal farmers, and farmers who own the land which is less than 2.5 acres, which is less than 2.5 acres. And you have a landless peasants. And this class is so vulnerable because these peasants earn their livelihood by working as manual laborers in agricultural lands of others, as they do not possess any land, right? So they work as sharecroppers or subtenants of those lands. So I repeat again. So on the basis of these land holdings, and you have a rich peasants and who own 50 acres, and hundreds of acres, and you have another set is called the small peasants, and who own the 2.5 acres to 5 acres, and you have another set of farmers, and those are called marginal farmers, and who own the land less than 2.5 acres. And whereas you have another set of peasant class, those are called landless peasant, because these are so vulnerable section in Indian society, because they do not have any land. They do not have any land, yet they work as manual laborers in somebody's land, right? In somebody's land. So they are the landless peasants. They are the landless peasants. So this is another characteristics of types of peasants. This is another characteristics of types of peasants. And you have another, the third characteristic is that the class-based classification of peasants. The class-based classification of peasants. According to Utsa Patnaik, and a very famous sociologist, and gave an exemplary description of agrarian setup and agrarian studies in Indian context. According to this scholar, the class differentiation exists within peasantry. So he growth of capitalism in rural peasantry has resulted in the exploitation of peasantry that has taken a class character. According to her, there are two categories of peasants, and one the big landlords, and the second the agricultural laborers, and who also include the sharecroppers, right? So this is the since this characteristic of class is taking on the economy lines and the class lines, so the scholar tries to argue that one those the big landlords and those who do not own the land, they are called agricultural laborers. So this class is based on the classification of peasants. This the peasant group is categorized on the basis of class, on the basis of class. So this is a third type of category, and you have a fourth type of category, that is the peasant classification on the basis of resource ownership. On the basis of resource ownership, some sociologists have categorized the peasants on the basis of several other resources, such as utilization of loans, tenancy, ownership of assets, for instance, and you have a credit from bank and repayment of capacity of loans, etc. So there are five types of peasant groups according to K.L. Sharma. K.L. Sharma is one of the leading sociologists in Indian context, and he gave a very valid, description and analysis of the peasant class, and who are the peasant class. He also categorized that the peasant class on the basis of resource ownership, on the basis of resource ownership. So according to him, there are five types of peasant groups, in that exist in Indian agrarian system. So he says that owner cultivators, and you have a largely owner and cultivator, you have a largely tenant and cultivator, tenant cultivator, and totally poor person. So these are the five, the context, types of classification he gave. So in addition to the classification of sociologists, there are economists also, and who have extraordinarily classified peasants into landlords, rich peasants, middle class peasants, poor peasants, and agricultural peasants, and so on and so forth. So, however, in any classification of peasants, land tenancy and land size play an important role, isn't it? So, and whatever the classification you take, whatever the classification you define, but in all this classification, it is the land that play an important role in defining the characteristics of Indian agrarian system. Indian agrarian setup, because whenever we say agriculture, it is the land that becomes the primary source, for cultivation and do business on those tracts of land. Therefore, so it is in any type of classification of peasants, it is the land tenancy and land size play an important role in defining the characteristics of rural sociology in Indian context. Thus, both these combined together play an important role in determining the criteria for peasant classification. So, so now we have discussed the type of peasants in Indian context. Now we'll try to understand the peasant movement. There are a lot of peasant movements. Movements where India has witnessed, not only during colonial time but also after independence. We find a lot of huge protest from the Indian farmers, and who demand for a fair price, the minimum price, for their agricultural produce, and they bargain and they demand from the Indian government, and to ask for more wages, for their subsidies, for their agricultural inputs, and as well as outputs. So what is a peasant movement? And let us try to understand. The peasant movement is a social movement involved with the agricultural policy. As you all know that, peasant always denotes the relations that exist in the agricultural relations, right? So peasant movement is a social movement involved with the agricultural policy. So when we say that, peasant movement, we are invariably saying that that is a social movement. So what is a social movement? The social movement is a term we use that whenever a group of people and who come together and join under the protest, with certain aims and objectives, once they form a social group, and once they mobilize, once the leadership of that group mobilize the people to join in that particular group, that has certain aims and objectives to achieve their demands. Once they mobilize, once they come to the street and start mobilizing and demanding for fair wages, as in the context of peasants. So once they come into the streets and form a social group, and once they have certain characteristics of common aim, common aim and common characteristics of that movement, that movement is called the social movement. That movement is called social movement. So since peasant movement can also be called as a social movement, because the peasant movement possesses the characteristics of social movement. So the peasant movement is a social movement that is a social movement involved with the agricultural policies, and it has a long history that can be traced to the numerous peasant uprisings that occurred in various regions of the world throughout human history. As you all know that, it's not just the whenever we say the agricultural relations, it is not limited to the India alone, and you can find that a lot of the movements, the present movements that have occurred throughout the world, right? It is the agriculture is the basic human activity that was there, that has been there in the world history, and throughout the ages, and throughout the periods, right? So these moments are there across the world, but when it comes to the India, it is a very different nature altogether. The different nature altogether, right? So we'll discuss that aspect a little later. But Anthony, for instance, and when it comes to the present moment, scholars such as Anthony, and who is a political scientist, and he has defined a political peasant movement as a social movement made up of peasants, that is, the small landholders or farm workers on large farms, right? So usually inspired by the goal of improving the situation of peasants in a nation or territory. Yeah, generally, this movement always they have certain goals to improve their lives, to improve their the economy life and social lives. For that purpose, they come and join in the protest. For their common, to meet their common objectives and goals, right? So a peasant movement is defined as a relatively organized and continuous collective action involving violence or the threat of violence for securing more share in the control or ownership of land and its produce, and to abolish injustice which have arisen thereof. It means, the peasant movement always wants, for a fair share in the agricultural produce, a fair share for their, for the minimum wages, minimum price, minimum support MSP, and the minimum support price for their agricultural produce. Friends, as you all know that, the farmers in the North India, they have a huge protest against the central government, on the farm laws, in the recent past, right? And currently there are a lot of protest movements are going here and there. Even in the Telangana and Andhra Pradesh context also, a lot of farmers are coming into the streets and demand for a minimum support price, for their agricultural produce, and also they ask for the minimum or maximum, the subsidies, for their agricultural input, to produce the agricultural products, right? So therefore, a peasant movement is defined as a relatively organized and continuous collective action involving violence or the threat of violence for securing more share in the control or ownership of land and its produce, and to abolish injustice which have arisen thereof. Which have arisen thereof. So, when it comes to the peasant movements in Indian context, there's a very lot of scholars and who have attempted to understand the nature and the causes and consequences of peasant movements in India. So, for instance, you have Ghansham Shah, and who's a very well-known scholar and the scientist, social scientist, and who neatly and scholarly depicted the nature of peasant movements in Indian context. So, according to Ghansham Shah, in India, peasant movements are generally classified into pre-British, British, or colonial, or post-independence. So, I think he tries to say that these movements, these peasant movements occurred throughout the history. So therefore, and he classifies those movements are pre-British, British, and post-British. Post-British in the sense after independence. That is independent India. So and you have peasants that have occurred throughout in different periods. So uh, according to similarly, according to women, there are certain movements which continue despite the changes in the political power. Despite the changes in the political power, which means that you know, despite the changes in the political power, in the sense pre-British, during the times of those kingdoms and kings and who have ruled our India. India witnessed, those parts of the, India witnessed peasant movements because they fought against the kings. So the peasants also fought against the British. And now the peasant is also fighting against the state government and central government of India, isn't it? So it means that despite there is a change in the nature of political power, the peasant movement continues to arise, continues to emerge in its new manifestations in different contexts throughout the history. So that's why we say that these peasant movements, they continue despite the changes in the political power, despite the changes in the political power. So these are the movements and which started in the pre-independence era and are still continued through with the different goals. The classification is also based on time span, as the structure of agrarian system also differs from time to time. So also the peasant movements, isn't it? So the economic policies of British adversely affected the Indian peasants. The British government used to protect the landlords and money lenders, and they exploited the peasants. So the peasants rose in revolt against this injustice on many occasions. The peasants in Bengal, the peasants in the south, the peasants in various parts, and they revolted against the British and the peasants. And in other parts of the country, for example, it is not always the peasants in India fought against the British alone. And peasants in Indian context also fought against the in their respective kings and princely states. And because India is governed by princely states at the time of the colonial period, right? For instance, when it comes to our Telangana, for example, Telangana is a place and was ruled by the Nizams, right? So they fought against the Nizams. It is not they fought against the British. And here the people fought against the Nizam. Fought against the Nizam, because it is the Zamindars, it is the Deshmukhs, and it is the big landlords. They own thousands of acres of land, and they also indulged in the creation of injustice against the laborers and agriculture tenants in India, in Telangana soil. And it is where the farmers from Telangana, they revolted against not only the Nizam but also the Zamindars and Deshmukhs and police patels and Mal patels, and they fought against this agrarian setup, hierarchy and in fact, as you all know, that movement is called, Telangana armed struggle that took a different turn in 1948, right? So September, somewhere in the September, and it was September 17th, where the Nizam had to surrender, to the forces of Indian government on the one hand, and to the forces of the peasant, unrest. So that was the thing. So in other words, what I'm trying to here is that when it comes to the peasant movements during the colonial time, so it is peasant is not just again fought against the colonial rule alone, but also the peasants also fought against in their respective domains of princely states, in the domains of their princely states. So the peasant movement in India was arose during the British colonial period, and when economic policies have characterized in the ruin of traditional handicrafts, leading and change of ownership and overcrowding of land and massive debt and empowerment of peasantry. So it means that with the introduction of many agricultural policies by the colonial rule, and that actually affected adversely on the handicrafts of the rural setup. So one thing is that the subsidies, there were no sufficient subsidies, and it was a complete destruction of rural economy, and where the farmers were forced to end up as agricultural laborers because they do not own huge tracts of land. So they indulge themselves as the small marginalized farmers and tenants of farmers in the lands of landlords. And once they produce those agricultural produce, and it is the landowners and who actually exploited this landless laborers, and they took maximum agricultural produce, and leaving no room for the scope of the landless laborers who eat those agricultural produce. So it was like there's a complete disharmony that existed in the colonial rule. So that actually resulted into the form of a peasant uprising during the colonial period, and development of and there was a development of peasant movements in the post-colonial period as well. As you all know that so it is the peasant movement is not it didn't stop with that that independence or declaring India as independent India, because the peasant movement continues to rise even after the independence, So they continue to rise even after the independence. In its new manifestations for their to bargain for a minimum support price for their agricultural produce, and to ask for more subsidies for their agriculture of various crops in independent India. So we have a different movements. For instance, and the Kisan Sabha movement started in Bihar under the leadership of Swami Sahajanand Saraswati, and who had formed in 1929 the Bihar Provincial Kisan Sabha in order to mobilize the peasant grievances against the zamindari attacks on their occupancy rights. So they started a huge mobilization that was recorded and documented in Indian history. So gradually the peasant movement intensified and spread across the rest of India. So all these radical developments on the peasant front culminated in the formation of All India Kisan Sabha at the Lucknow session of the Indian National Congress in April 1936, with Swami Sahajanand Saraswati elected as its first president. So that you all know those history. So what I'm trying to indicate here is that this peasant movement started to inspire other peasants in various parts of the states in India. So by seeing the peasant oppressed in another part of the India, so another part of the India, and those peasants also took inspiration from those peasant movements. They also started mobilizing the peasants and farmers and for collective mobilization and demand, for the justice to their agricultural produce, to their agricultural produce. So D.D. Kosambi and R.S. Sharma, together with Daniel Turner, all the scholars and who attempted to understand the nature of peasant movements in Indian context. And these scholars have struggled a lot to document such histories in the Indian history, and for that purpose, and for that reason, we are actually studying those documents. And actually, the credit goes to them, because those people struggled a lot in documenting the history and in the form of books, and we are reading them. Those books now are accessible to us, and we are reading them. So in fact, we are always thankful to them for giving us such wonderful histories of those peasant moments. So here this I classified the colonial India into the following areas under the British rule as Raitwari, the areas under the princely authority as Zamindari, and the tribal zones. So here this he classifies those movements as the movements that comes under the colonial rule are known as the Raitwari, right? And the areas which comes under the princely authority, as I said, that princely states, those are called as Zamindari, and tribal zones in India, and that doesn't come under these categories, and those are called as the tribal zones, right? Here, this I calls the movements as the peasant struggles in the colonial period, and those of political post-independence era as agrarian struggles. So there is a clear distinction that one can see. In other words, in the pre-independence era, those peasant movements are called peasant struggles, but whereas those struggles in the post-independence era are called as agrarian struggles. So this is according to A.R. Desai. We'll try to understand what does it mean. We'll try to understand. Okay, the phrase, according to A.R. Desai, refers not only to include peasants but also others. It means what? It means that there is broadening the vision of the understanding of peasant movements. Earlier the peasant means that only the person who tills the land, and but here the agrarian struggle, it's an enlargement of the understanding of those phrases. It means that it is not only includes the farmers alone, but also the related networks of those farming, the related networks. It means that the agrarian struggle, and now we are using the word agrarian instead of peasant, which means that now you see, take the example that the person who tills the land and he produces the agricultural produce, and another person comes into picture, and he buys, he generally buy this agricultural produce from this, and again of the linkages from one part of the corner to the consumption of those agricultural produce in the extreme part of those supply chain. So here, when we see the agrarian struggle, so it is not just the person who tills the land, but also, for instance, we talk agrarian struggle also indicates that peasant families also, right? Peasant families and the chain of network that exist along the lines of this, supply chain. So it is not just the peasant alone, but also peasant, the middleman, and also the state and everyone. Those are all included. In this chain of supply chain of agrarian relations. Therefore, scholars such as A.R. Desai, now they say that one cannot merely delimit the phrase to peasants alone, because now the struggles are now enlarged, because those now because it is not the peasant alone who is indulged in this agrarian setup, but also the other, the middleman, the supply chain that exists along the lines of these agrarian relations. So therefore, since the lot of people, the lot of classes and categories are involved in this supply chain, now we are using the word not peasants alone. We are using the word, or rather, the A.R. Desai says that we should use the word agrarian struggle instead of peasant struggle. Instead of peasant struggle, right? So he further divides the post-independence agrarian struggles into two categories: the movements launched by the newly emerging proprietary classes, comprising rich farmers, viable sections of the middle peasant proprietors, and the streamlined landlords. The second category is that the movements launched by the various sections of the agrarian poor, in which the agrarian proletariat have been acquiring central importance. It means that now the agrarian struggle is not just the launched by the people and who own the lands, but also the people and who are working as agricultural laborers in those lands, and with having no means of accessing to those ownership to that lands, they remain as poor, right? The agrarian proletariats, uh, they also indulge in the agrarian movements, agrarian struggles. So this is we can find the two types of agrarian struggles. One, those who have already have the land, they are the farmers, and they come to the street for for the demand for their agricultural subsidies, and for the demand for a minimum support price for their agricultural produce. This is one set of group, and another set of the group is that those who do not own the land of agricultural land, but they work as tenants. They work as agricultural laborers in the lands of the landowners, right? So they also demand for the minimum wages for their agricultural labor work, and they also demand for a land, demanding for a minimum acres of land from the government. Now you find that there are now various governments in across the India, state governments as well as the union government. Now they are offering, they are coming with a different understanding to address the issues pertaining to the agricultural laborers and those who do not have any land. Right, and now they are coming with certain policy measures that they are also for instance in Telangana context, and you have a Dalit Bandhu and you have a Raitu Bandhu, all these schemes that are being launched by the governments to address certain issues pertaining to the agricultural laborers as well as the agricultural classes, those who own the land, so this is another set of agrarian practices, that exist in the Indian society, right? The post-independent era India, there was a centralized political authority and a capitalist mode of production acting as driving forces. There has not yet evolved a unified agrarian pattern. The capitalist mode of agriculture has developed in a few states such as Gujarat, Maharashtra, Punjab, and you find even other parts of India also. The classification also varies in accordance with the theoretical framework that exists in the agrarian studies. So what I'm trying to understand is that all these peasants movements, they occurred in the post-independent era as well as the pre-independent era. The peasants, I mean the farmers, they came into the streets. They mobilized themselves by forming a unified collective force to demand for a viable justice for their agricultural produce, for the viable justice for their to support for a minimum support price from the government. So this is a different understanding, right? So on the other hand, you have a Ranajit Guha, and he also gives a beautiful description of present moments. Next, Ranajit Guha also, he looks at the present moments in a different way. For instance, he examines present insurgency from the perspective of present consciousness of a revolt. He delineates the understanding underlying structural features of tribal consciousness of the peasants, namely negation, solidarity, transmission, etc., etc. So all this understanding, it helps us to map out the present moments in Indian context. Present moments in Indian context. So now let us try to understand the agrarian class structure, right? So let us try to understand now the agrarian class structure, that exists in the Indian context. So the traditional Indian society was organized around the caste lines. The agrarian relations were governed by the norms of Jajmani system. However, the Jajmani relations began to disintegrate after the colonial rulers introduced changes in the agrarian Indian agriculture. The process of modernization and development initiated by the Indian state during the post-independence period further weakened the traditional social structure. While caste continues to be an important social institution in the contemporary Indian society, its significance as a system of organizing economic life has considerably declined. Through agricultural land in most parts of India is still owned by the traditional cultivating caste groups. Their relations with the landless menials are no more regulated by the norms of the caste system. The landless members of the lower caste now work with the cultivating farmers as agricultural laborers. We can say that in a sense that caste has given way to class in Indian countryside. What I'm trying to indicate here is that in India, it is the caste that determines the future of Indian citizens, isn't it? So caste play an important role not only in the past, but also it continues to play an active part, a role in the contemporary societies also. So when we talk about agrarian relations in the Indian context, those agrarian relations are undoubtedly governed by the caste relations, governed by the caste relations. However, with the introduction of this, the modern agricultural machinery and the capitalist framework in the agrarian relations in Indian society, there is some sort of change, that is taking place in the relations. I'll try to explain this point. Is that till recently, only few particular castes are engaged in the agrarian setup. Only few particular castes are engaged in the agrarian produce, and they used to own the land and they used to do that business. But nowadays, even other castes are also joining that agricultural relations. They also indulge in the agriculture, right? So it means that particularly among the lower strata of those agricultural relations, that is the landless laborers or the tenants, farmers, in this strata, one can find different castes are coming into this group. Different castes are coming into this group, and they're working as agricultural laborers. It means that once upon a time, these are all the different caste groups. Now all these caste groups are coming together to work as agricultural laborers in the Indian agrarian setup. So it means that a class character is coming into play and occupies a predominant place in the Indian agrarian relations. In the Indian agrarian relations. In the Indian agrarian relations. So in a sense that the caste has given a way to class in the Indian countryside. However, however, the agrarian social structure is still marked by diversities, and of course, diversities in the sense that one cannot say that one change is the same for all changes in entire India. It is not that, because in Indian agrarian system it is not a monolithic, or it is not a homogeneous characteristics of those relations that exist in the India, because each part of India is experienced a different nature of agricultural relations. For instance, you find a different agrarian setup in the Punjab, and you find a different agrarian setup in the northeast, and you find a different agrarian setup in the southern parts of India. So it means that due to this diversified nature of this agrarian relations in Indian context, so we find a different nature of those agrarian class structure that exist in the Indian society. Indian society. So, my dear friends, what I'm trying to indicate here is that the Indian agrarian class structure is very diversified in nature, and it's not a homogeneous entity, and one cannot be picturized as a monolithic or monocausal understanding of these relations, because Indian society is famously connoted as a unity in diversity. So in India we have a different caste, and we have a different religions, different regions, and each part is governed by all this due to not sociological reasons, but also the ecological reasons, and you find a different communities and human groups that exist in different parts of the India. So therefore, the agrarian class structure in India is not a homogeneous entity. It is a diversified entity. So in one way or the other. So my dear friends, so in this class we try to understand the peasant movements as well as the agrarian class structure that exists in the Indian society. In the next class, we'll be talking more about such aspects of rural sociology and urban sociology, and will be dealing with such ideas, with such more fascinating ideas in the next class, my dear friends. Thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you very much.